Most lawyers graduate from law school and don't learn it. And then let's say you do take a negotiation class, one or two that are available in class, then you take the bar exam, you graduate, you go into a law firm. Usually for the first 2 or 3 years, you're not having client interaction or getting much courtroom experience or much interaction with opposing counsel. So we're focused on research, building those arguments and everything. So our skills are getting stale again. And so now we're put in a position where it's like, okay, there's not a judge where I'm trying to advocate my case for or anything like that. I'm just talking to this lawyer on the other side. When have I ever had the opportunity to practice this? Never.
You're listening to the Legal Mastermind Podcast with your hosts, Ryan Klein and Chase Williams, the go-to podcast for learning from the experts in the legal community about effective ways to grow and manage your law firm.
Hello everyone, this is Chase Williams. I'm here today with my co-host Ryan Klein. Today we'll be discussing negotiation and how to negotiate like the future of your firm depends on it. We're here with expert negotiator Kwame Christian, the director of the American Negotiation Institute. He was previously a lawyer and now frequently conducts negotiation and conflict management workshops around the country. He's also the author of the Amazon bestseller, Nobody Will Play With Me, How to Use Compassionate Curiosity to Find Confidence in Conflict. Welcome to the Legal Mastermind Podcast.
Hey guys, thank you for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be on your show. So I am a business lawyer by trade, but my passion lies in teaching people the skills of effective negotiation and conflict resolution. So now I am the director of the American Negotiation Institute, and I'm a professor of law at The Ohio State University and an MBA professor at Otterbein University in Columbus, Ohio.
When we were initially talking, we're talking about negotiating, we don't have too much exposure, especially in this industry on the side that you're at. So when we're thinking about it, we're talking about like, is it personal injury or just negotiating, with insurance companies? Is it mergers, acquisitions, which seems like it's a lot of negotiating. But you mentioned that it can be that, but it can especially be what happens internally the day to day. A lot of things that are technically negotiations, but you don't look at them that way. So that's kind of where we could start.
Yeah, and that's what I've found when I talk to listeners in different parts of the country when they're trying to figure out how to become a better negotiator. What I found is that the single biggest barrier that people have when it comes to negotiating effectively is that they have very low negotiation awareness. So they don't know when a negotiation begins. And so the operational definition that I like to use for negotiation is any conversation where somebody in the conversation wants something. So any conversation where somebody wants something. And so with that definition, you'll recognize that you're negotiating every day. You can't go a single day without negotiating unless you're at a meditation retreat where you can't talk to anybody. So yeah, that's the first thing that we need to recognize. So as attorneys, it's not just negotiating with opposing counsel. It's those difficult conversations with clients when it comes to setting expectations, figuring out what the right course of action is, and making sure that they actually follow through on what you agreed upon. It's those difficult conversations with colleagues when you're trying to come up with a strategy for how to approach these situations professionally. It might be your boss negotiating salary. You might be the boss and somebody's asking you for more privileges, less privileges, more flexibility, those type of things. And if you have families, you're negotiating all the time with significant others, children, etc. So the number one thing we need to recognize is that we're negotiating all the time. That's why I call the podcast Negotiate Anything, because I really want to hit home on the fact that we need to first recognize these negotiations before we can start utilizing these skills in order to get more of what we want.
What's the best way to start becoming a better negotiator?
Well, recognition is one, but then also being clear on what it is that you want out of the negotiation. It seems really obvious, but sometimes that's really not clear when people start having conversations. And so before we even get into the interaction with the other side, we should take a second and figure out what exactly it is that we want. Because sometimes when we are in situations of distress or any type of emotional situation, we develop tunnel vision. We say, this is what I need. This is my singular path to success. And so we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, Is it though? Is it really? What do I really want out of this? What do I really want to get out of this? And when we are entering these conversations and we're not clear on it, it leads to a level of disorganization that makes the negotiation ineffective. So that's the first thing we need to do. The second thing we need to do is we need to be curious, because especially as lawyers, we're trained in the adversarial approach to the legal system. So I advocate for my side, you advocate for your side. And so I'm not supposed to give you credit for the good points that you make. I'm just supposed to tear down everything that you do. The problem is that that is not actually persuasive in terms of what actually moves people to change behavior. When you approach conversations in that way, it makes people lock down, where we see things as a zero sum. It's like, I can't even give you an inch. I can't give you any credit, any points, because then that takes away from me. That's problematic. So we need to first become curious. And that's why you saw in the TED Talk, the method I talk about is the compassionate curiosity framework. So we need to become curious and ask ourselves beforehand, what is it that they want? Why do they want it? And then come to the conversation prepared with questions to learn more about the other side. And a lot of times when we have these conversations, we start persuading too soon. And that can be really, really problematic when it comes to negotiations, because we need to take the time to learn from the other side, understand their perspective before we start moving forward.
Are people that are focused on the idea of becoming better negotiators, are they currently typically pushovers in any way, or are they kind of just starting at a different point?
Well, what I've found is that different people need different things. And but I'd say a disproportionate amount of the people who listen to the podcast and listen to the TED Talk struggled with people pleasing to some degree. And so that was me. That's why in my book, it's all about, is really not just about negotiation and conflict resolution. About 60 or 70% of the book is about, for you psychologically, how you can overcome your personal barriers to success. My undergrad degree was in psychology. I was planning on becoming a therapist for a while. But when it comes to my approach to negotiation, it has a focus on you, the individual, the person that I'm teaching first. So we need to figure out your personal barriers and how you can develop the confidence you need to execute. And so here's the thing. I always say that with negotiation literature for years and years, we've just been giving recipes to people who are afraid to get in the kitchen. It doesn't matter if you know what to do if you don't have the confidence you need to do it. And so with the online course I'm doing, it's mainly, before we get into the tactics, it's about developing that confidence, because I want to make sure that everybody who listens to the show, listens to your show, buys the course, whatever, I want to make sure that you are in a place where you are psychologically equipped to even have the discussion before we start talking about how to have the discussion.
So since building confidence is that baseline, how does one start building confidence when you might not be too comfortable with the art of negotiation or even yourself in general?
Yeah, it takes a lot of introspection, and that's you have to look within yourself and try to figure out what the barrier is. So I'll talk about my experience. So the book is called Nobody Will Play With Me, which is a very strange name for a negotiation book, but it stems from an incident on the playground from first grade. And so I'm a Caribbean American. And when I was younger, I had a really, really strong Caribbean accent. I grew up in Tiffin, Ohio, which was not very diverse, to say the least. And I remember one day on the playground, there was a day when nobody would play with me. I went to different people all throughout recess and said, "Hey, can I play with you?" And they all said no. And I remember going to the teacher just bawling in tears. And she said, "What happened?" And I said, "Nobody would play with me." And I remember that day I vowed to myself that would never happen again. People were going to like me. I was going to have a ton of friends. I'll never feel this lonely again. So what ended up happening was, in order to maintain those relationships, me at a young age, I said to myself, listen, you have to let stuff go. If there's any kind of discord that starts to manifest itself within my friend group, I'm just going to let it go. I'm not going to fight it because I've worked too hard to get these friends. And so that is the pattern that I started to develop in my relationships. I started to let people walk walk all over me. And it wasn't until I took the time to look within myself and talk to people who I respected about it, I realized that this was a serious barrier that I needed to overcome. And so the issues that we will face psychologically in these conversations will be different for different people. And here's another example from the opposite perspective. I remember in one of my presentations, somebody shared that as in her youth, she was abused. And so she learned at a young age to see all of these interactions as a threat. And the abuse that she faced wasn't physical, it was verbal. And so when she was younger, the adults in her life would insult her intelligence regularly every day. So in conflict, the way that she would read the conflict is that when somebody disagreed with her, it was them insulting her intelligence. They think I'm stupid. And it would trigger her to fight back to a level that was unproductive, because she was constantly defending her intelligence instead of addressing the substance of the point. And so, like I said, it'll be different for different people. So it takes a lot of time to go through that introspective process to figure out what your personal barrier is. But once you figure that out, it can pay big dividends when it comes to creating a strategy and approach that's good for you during the conversation. And even before that, a strategy and approach for you as it relates to getting in the appropriate mindset before the conversation.
It's interesting you're mentioning confidence, especially with lawyers, because I'd figure confidence would always have like a pretty significant baseline, considering you study hard to go to law school. Law school is not easy. You graduate, you get to a firm in a lot of markets that are saturated. So a lot of lawyers, I'd imagine, feel like they're there for a reason and should build confidence based off of all the things that led them up to where they are. But I guess that may not always be the case.
Right. Well, you have to remember that confidence is compartmentalized. So for instance, I go around the country, I speak, I present CLEs and in business organizations and all that stuff. So I'm now comfortable presenting in front of people. I speak Spanish as well. And now if you put me in front of people to speak Spanish, I emotionally break down. I cannot handle it, because I am significantly more confident in my ability to speak English than I am in my ability to speak Spanish. And so you have to think about what it is that the attorneys are able to be confident in. So I'm confident in my ability to learn substantive law. I'm confident in my ability to create arguments on behalf of my other side, on my side, while at the same time taking down arguments on the other side. So you have to stop and think for a second, when in the course of my legal career did I learn to negotiate? Negotiation is a specialty course in law schools. Most lawyers graduate from law school and don't learn it. And then let's say you do take a negotiation class, one or two that are available in class, then you take the bar exam, you graduate, you go into a law firm. Usually for the first 2 or 3 years, you're not having client interaction or getting much courtroom experience or much interaction with opposing counsel. So we're focused on research, building those arguments and everything. So our skills are getting stale again. And so now we're put in a position where it's like, okay, there's not a judge where I'm trying to advocate my case for or anything like that. I'm just talking to this lawyer on the other side. When have I ever had the opportunity to practice this? Never. And so the thing is, even though negotiation is going to be a massive part of our practice, the vast majority of cases settle. It's still not a skill that people have taken the time to build up. And it's not necessarily a personal indictment saying, oh, you should have done this. But when you think back and look at it, we haven't had many opportunities to improve our negotiation skills. So the impetus is on us. It needs to be on us to really take control of our personal development and learn more about the skills so we can have more confidence.
If someone's in that situation, what are the ways that they can incrementally negotiate? I don't know if you pick your battles or you kind of like make things that are negotiable that they wouldn't have been otherwise, just for the sake of building upon that skill, so that later down the road to 2-3 years, you have the opportunity to do it, that you're not completely blindsided by someone that's been doing it for a long time.
Yeah. So one of the approaches that I use is taken from cognitive behavioral therapy. It's called exposure therapy. And what you do is you expose yourself to this thing that scares you more and more and more to the point where it doesn't have that same power over you. So in English, speaking in English, I used to be afraid of public speaking. And so what I did was I decided, listen, I'm going to force myself to step up and speak when I have the opportunity. And after doing that for a couple of years, I finally got to a point where I feel comfortable doing it. And so we have to do the same thing when it comes to these difficult conversations. Kind of going back to what we talked about before, we have to recognize that not only are these everyday interactions opportunities to negotiate, which presents us with the opportunity to get more of what we want, avoid things that we don't want, and strengthen relationships in the process, they're also opportunities to practice. They're fantastic opportunities to practice. And so you have to ask yourself, what skill particularly am I practicing in this conversation? So for example, I mentioned earlier before the episode that I have a 4-year-old son. And so sometimes when he's having a temper tantrum at a time that is inconvenient and I want to do something, but he is in my way, one of the things that I work on is patience. I need to learn how to calm down, suspend my agenda, and focus on what it is that he needs in order to overcome this emotional outburst. I guarantee you'll have some bad negotiators on the other side, but nobody will be as bad as a 4-year-old in the middle of a tantrum. And so I say to myself, if I can manage to maintain my patience in this situation, it'll make me a better negotiator down the road. And so maybe in a difficult conversation with your spouse, you recognize that you might get into a tendency of trying to advocate your case or persuade simply by lecturing, just going on and on and on and on. No, what I need to do in this moment is practice my empathy, practice my curiosity. I'm going to ask a lot of questions, open-ended questions, not leading questions, but genuinely try to understand their position. And then I'm going to reflect that back to her. And then I'm just going to let her know that I understand. Before I even get to the persuasion side, I'm going to let her know that I understand. That is a practice that will help me in my difficult conversations when it matters with clients or opposing counsel, whatever it might be. So a massive way to overcome these barriers when it comes to confidence is taking these everyday opportunities to practice in order to improve.
So I feel like I can negotiate with somebody by giving up something, right? What are some ways to not come at it with that approach?
Yeah. So I think one thing we need to change is our mentality, because a lot of times we try to pigeonhole ourselves into one camp or another. So you might say, I'm a win-win negotiator. I'm a win-lose negotiator. I'm collaborative. I'm positional, those type of things. But what you really need to be is flexible, because you need to figure out what it is clearly that you want, and then what strategies and tactics get you there. And that's going to depend in large part on the negotiator who's on the other side. So let's say, for example, I consider myself to be a win-win negotiator. I read Getting to Yes. It made me feel really good inside. And now I'm just going to try to collaborate with everybody. The problem is not everybody is a collaborator. So in those situations, if you stay relentlessly collaborative while the other side is focusing on winning and beating you, it's going to be a really bad situation, because you're going to be focused on doing things like sharing information and compromising, while they're going to be in the business of taking information and taking your compromises without giving anything. So we need to read the situation and adjust as necessary. But even before that, something even more simple is taking the time to prepare. So I have a gift for the audience. If they're interested, they can go to my website, AmericanNegotiationInstitute.com/guide, GUIDE, and download a free negotiation guide. We have actually 15 negotiation guides that help you to systematically prepare for your negotiation. And I'll talk about a study real briefly. There was a study that showed that they had different people go into mock negotiations. I think it was 230 simulated negotiations, and they broke the groups into 2 different groups. The control group was negotiators who did not prepare at all, and the experimental group was comprised of negotiators that all they were the same level as the other group, but they just took the time to systematically prepare for their negotiations. And so the outcome was this. So on average, the group that took the time to prepare was able to create 11% more value for themselves, and at the same time produce 6% more value for the other side. So that's really interesting, because not only did you win for yourself, 11% more value for me and my client, that's great, but they were also able to create more value for the other side, which means that at the end of the negotiation, the other side feels better about the outcome, even though you were able to maximize the value you created for yourself, because you too created value for the other side. So preparation is going to be one of the secret keys to success. It's not glamorous or anything like that, but that's really the meat and potatoes when it comes to effective negotiation, taking the time to think things through and practice beforehand.
In addition to the resources you're mentioning, and of course we'll be mentioning more when we get towards the end, are there other resources that you think lawyers specifically might find useful for their law firms? And then also, are there any kind of approaches that you just are completely against or just don't really heavily favor? Like, I've seen some things saying, negotiate like your life depends on it, or other things that say, negotiate and don't give an inch in any situation. Are there just some approaches that you just don't think mesh well with the legal community?
Yeah. This is great. As far as resources, I think the best and easiest ones, the freest ones would be the guide that I talked about before, and then the podcast. Because with the Negotiate Anything podcast, it's not just having experts on every week to talk about the best negotiation tactics and what's new as far as thought leadership, but also we have sparring sessions. The sparring sessions are a lot of fun. And so sparring sessions are where I invite the guests on to the show to engage in a mock negotiation. We don't really prepare it at all. They don't know what I'm going to do, but they do know that my goal is to become the embodiment of your worst fears and be just as awful, as aggressive, as awkward, as horrible as you could possibly imagine, just so you could show the audience what you can do to handle somebody like that. So again, it allows you to see something a little bit more realistic when it comes to how to actually have the conversation. But I think just taking the time to learn and exposing yourself to new information and taking the time to practice, those are the best resources that you have when it comes to the negotiation and improving. And then as far as things that I am against, I would just say in general, it would be things that create unnecessary barriers to success. And so I know that's very broad, but I'll give some examples. So for example, when you don't take the time to acknowledge the emotion of the other side, if you don't take the time to figure out what it is that's causing them emotional distress, you're going to have an unnecessary barrier to success, because if you don't address that emotion, the emotional issue is going to be there, and it's going to make deal making more difficult than it needs to be. As lawyers, one of the things that we like to do is focus on the logic. But here's the thing. Humans aren't logical. We never have been and never will be. And you think about, for instance, economics. With economics, in a lot of cases, there are very clear right answers. So for instance, simple example from economics, is something better than nothing? The answer would be yes when it comes to money, right? But that's not the way humans work. So there's an example called an experiment called the ultimatum test. And so what you do is you have two people, and the person has, say, $100. And the person has the opportunity to make an offer to you. So let's say I have $100. I'm making an offer to you, and you just need to accept it. And if you accept it, we both get the money. So let's say we don't play this game. You get $0, right? If I make an offer and you reject it, you get $0. If I make an offer, you accept it, you get some money. So rationally speaking, what I should do is I should say, I'm going to keep $99 and I'll give you $1. That puts me in the best possible scenario, and that puts you in a scenario that is better than where you would have otherwise been, which is $0, right? So rationally speaking, that's the quote right answer. But what they found is that if the offer isn't close to 50-50 or like 60-40, the other side says, this is unfair, and I will reject the offer, sinking your opportunity to make money and my opportunity to make money in order to punish you for the unfair offer, right? So that's just a really simple example of the fact that humans are not rational beings. That's why economics is not the study on its own. Now you have behavioral economics, where you blend psychology and economics to figure out what humans will do under certain circumstances, to figure out what kind of policies and persuasive techniques make more sense when it comes to divvying up this money in negotiations and whatnot. So I think really the biggest thing that we need to worry about when it comes to effective negotiation and mistakes that we make, especially as lawyers, is we assume rationality when it really doesn't exist. So we need to take the time to be more persuasive, focus on what is persuasive, not necessarily what is right in the legal sense, because sometimes that's not always the thing that will win the day.
Kwame, I know there's so much information out there, and you wrote a book. Can you remind us of your book title again?
Yes. So the book is called Nobody Will Play With Me: How to Find Confidence in Conflict.
And then can you recommend a couple of other books if our listeners want to get started in furthering themselves and to become better negotiators?
Yeah, Chris Voss is a hostage negotiator. He has a book called Never Split the Difference. It's a fantastic book, very, very practical. It's really cool how he's able to blend the collaborative approach with a positional approach, so people feel good about giving you everything they have. It's really cool. He was a guest on the podcast a couple of years ago, and he's going to come back on later this year. So if you want a summary, that's a fun way to do it. The other recommendation would be Negotiation Genius by Deepak Malhotra, and Max Bazerman. That's a really great book. Deepak Malhotra and Bazerman, they are both out of Harvard. And I think it's a great synopsis of some of the most powerful negotiation techniques and keeping up with the Harvard program on negotiation, the evolution of the getting to yes style. It's really cool to see how that program kind of has a lineage and how it evolves. So if you are saying to yourself, okay, I can only read one book, I would probably go with that one because it's more encyclopedic. If you want something that's immediately practical and useful, I would go with Never Split the Difference. But if you want the best book, I would say go with Nobody Will Play With Me, of course. That's what I should say. But I mean, I'm here to help people. And I think the Nobody Will Play With Me is a good starter book, especially if you struggle with confidence, because neither of those other two books speak to the confidence issue. But if you're looking for robust tactics, I would go with those two first.
Just to confirm your podcast name, it's called Negotiate Anything Podcast. And then I actually found you through a TED Talk you did called Finding Confidence in Conflict. And I would highly recommend. That's the reason we invited you on the show. I watched that speaking engagement and I was like, this is going to be perfect for our listeners.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
You do come and teach CLE classes, correct?
I do. I teach at law firms and I teach at bar associations.
Awesome. And then the final thing is you are offering our listeners those 15 negotiation guides at your website, and we'll add a hyperlink to the podcast when we do post it at AmericanNegotiationInstitute.com.
Perfect. Thank you very much. One last thing, just if confidence is something that you struggle with in negotiation, we have that negotiation course that focuses on how to build your confidence. And check out the podcast, check out the free resources. The goal is to help as many people as possible, because my philosophy is that the best things in life lie on the other side of difficult conversations. So the better able you are to master the skills of negotiation and conflict resolution, the more likely you are to put yourself on the track to live the best version of your life.
Thanks for listening to the Legal Mastermind podcast. If you're interested in working with Ryan and Chase, please email mastermind@marketmymarket.com. Make sure to join the free mastermind group for growing and managing your firm at lawfirmmastermind.com. Ryan Klein and Chase Williams are the managing partners at Market My Market, one of the top legal marketing companies in the United States.